Christelle Godlewski, your emotional support American abroad, and I've moved abroad 3 times in the last 12 years. This is How to Move Abroad for people who don't need more inspiration, they need an actual decision and a checklist. Each week, I cut through the internet noise and walk you through the stuff that actually decides whether this happens or not. Every episode ends with a weekly task because collecting information isn't progress, and someday isn't a strategy. Let's get into it. Okay, schools. Let's talk about it. And if you're not a parent, maybe you will be one day, or maybe you won't, but it's still an important topic. So if you're not a parent, maybe you skip this one, or maybe you listen along anyway because it's an important piece of the puzzle. And if you're looking at a visa related to students or education, it could be valuable for you. And I know for the parents who are listening, what happened to your body when I said the word school. Some version of your stomach dropped and your jaw tightened, and you thought about your kid, specifically this specific kid with this specific personality and this specific set of needs. And you thought, but how will this work for them? How in the world am I going to move them abroad? Not for a generic kid, but for your child. And that's the right question. And that is exactly the right question. The problem is most of the content out there about schools abroad is written for a generic child, which is helpful approximately never. So today I'm going to tell you what I actually know, not from research, but from lived experience, from navigating school systems in 2 countries with a kid who had food allergies and was identified as gifted and needed a school that could actually handle both of those things simultaneously without making it weird. From making decisions that cost money and decisions that save money and decisions that I'm still in the middle of making. I'll share it all today. There will be some Switzerland-specific information in this episode because that's where I live and that's what I know best. But the framework, the way to think about this applies everywhere. So stay with me even if Switzerland isn't your destination because the questions I'm going to walk you through are the right ones regardless of where you're going. And what applies in Switzerland is generally applicable also in Germany and Austria and several other countries. You would have to do research for your specific country, but it's really important that you understand, yes, there's Swiss-specific information, but how we made these decisions and what we did is going to be applicable across the board, okay? Here's what most people do when they start researching schools abroad. They Google international schools in whatever city, Paris, Morocco, like Marrakesh, it doesn't matter, right? Whatever city they're in. They find a list, they see the fees, and they either go to close the tab immediately because the fees are insane, or they add it to their spreadsheet of costs and move on. What they don't do is ask the more important question first, which is, what does the local school system actually look like? How does it work? And is it actually an option for my kid? And I get why most people skip that question. The local school system feels like the scariest of the options. The one where your kid walks in not speaking the language, navigating an unfamiliar system, figuring out the hard way of what's going on. International schools feel safe. It's generally in English or bilingual. It's familiar. It's structured in a way that looks like what you already know. But safe and right are not always the same thing. And expensive and right are definitely not the same thing. And I want to make sure that you're making an informed choice between the 2 real options rather than defaulting to the expensive one because the alternative felt too uncertain to actually investigate. So let's talk about both. And yes, I have experience in both. I'm going to start off with Austria because I think it makes the most sense. When we moved to Vienna with our daughter, she was very, very, very young. She was actually only 6 months old. So not school-aged yet in the traditional sense, but old enough to need daycare during the day while we worked. Austria is very unique in that, or at least for an American, and that most people don't start daycare until age 2. Why? Because moms get more than a year of maternity leave, and then they can extend that up to 8 years, actually, in different ways, right? So because my daughter was born in Switzerland, I did not qualify for the same maternity benefits as a local mom would. So my 6-month-old, finding daycare for a 6-month-old in Austria, it had to be private. There was no other option because there was no other way to go at the time for a 6-month or a 9-month-old in her case when she started daycare. And something else most people don't know about Austria in general is daycare for children over 2 is covered by the state as part of your tax system. So it's essentially free, which sounds amazing and is amazing with one giant caveat. You are in the system using state facilities, which work perfectly well for most kids, and were not quite right for ours. So when she turned 2, we had to look at what else we could do. Our daughter had food allergies. She was allergic to eggs, milk, and soy. So these are real food allergies, the kind that require actual attention and actual protocols and someone who's going to take it seriously and not just pick croutons off a salad and hand it back kind of situation, right? In reality, she was allergic to the point of having anaphylactic reaction to eggs. So it was super important for us that it was cared for. And when we looked at the state daycare situation and the food allergy situation together, we had to stay private. There was no option for us because we could not choose the food in the state daycare situation. In the long run, when she turned 2, we switched from babysitting daycare to a more structured learning program. We found a school that was in Swedish and German bilingual, which was not something we'd planned exactly, but it turned out to be wonderful. It was small, attentive, genuinely lovely. And because the state subsidizes childcare even for private options in Austria, we weren't paying a full private rate. We were paying around $600 a month, which in the context of what private international school fees look like elsewhere is actually extremely reasonable. So lesson 1 from our experience was understand what the state subsidizes before you assume private means unaffordable. Sometimes the gap between state and private is smaller than you think, especially for younger children. Before we left Vienna, while she was still at the Swedish school, our daughter was identified as gifted. I'm going to pause here because I want to be honest about what that means in practice, because it does not mean what TV movie suggested means. It doesn't mean she's sitting in the corner doing calculus at age 5. It means her brain works in a particular way that requires a particular kind of educational environment to actually function well. Too much repetition and she checks out and gets annoyed and gets annoying to other kids. Not enough challenge and she creates her own, which is not always convenient for the classroom or for us. What it actually meant for our move was this. Before we left Austria, the Swedish school called ahead. They called the local educational authorities in our destination canton of Lucerne in Switzerland and asked, essentially, this child is coming. She's been identified as gifted. What should her family know about the local system and what's appropriate for her? So the school asked that for us, partially because coming from the school and saying, my kid is gifted, or the kid is gifted is a lot different than a parent saying my kid is gifted, right? You hear that and you're like, meh, whatever. That's what they all say. But when the school says it and calls for help, that was very helpful for us because then Switzerland was going to be honest. And their answer was actually very interesting. Switzerland treats all children the same through primary school, through grades 1 through 6. There is no gifted program, no differentiated track, no acceleration. The system is deliberately designed to move everyone together through the early years, which sounds egalitarian in some ways, and it kind of is, but for a kid who needs more, it's a problem. So we were advised by the Swiss authorities to look at private school options if that was appropriate for our child. I'm going to take an aside here for a second. I need to explain something about the Swiss school system because if you're not considering Switzerland as a destination, or if you are and you have kids, this is possibly the most important thing I can tell you. It is similar in Germany and Austria and several other countries around Europe. It's not exactly the same, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of how this works, okay? So in Switzerland, grade 1 through 6, as I said, essentially are the same across the board. Everyone gets essentially the same education. They do have a track for students who are behind. They do have a track for students who need extra language acquisition help. But in Switzerland, grade 6 is the turning point. It's not a transition. It is literally a turning point. At the end of primary school, around age 11 or 12, depending on the canton, children are sorted into educational tracks that have real long-term implications for their future. These are essentially 3 different tracks depending on the canton, but the general shape of it is the following. There's a track oriented for vocational training and apprenticeships. Think, for example, an electrician, a plumber, a hairdresser, things like that, vocational and apprenticeships. Then there's a track that covers both vocational and higher education. Think daycare workers, teachers, etc. And then a track oriented towards university, what's called the gymnasium path, which usually leads to the Matura, which is the Swiss equivalent qualification that gets you into university. This sorting happens based on the child's performance from grades 3 through 6. Not a single exam, not just 1 year. It's actually 3 years. It's 4, 5, and 6. Teachers make recommendations, grades are assessed, and children are placed into their track for secondary school. Now, I want to be really clear about something here because this is where Americans' brains tend to either panic or dismiss it, and neither response is quite right. The system is not considered a life sentence. There is flexibility. Children can move between the tracks based on performance at key points. And the vocational track in Switzerland is genuinely respected in a way vocational paths in the US simply are not. Swiss apprenticeships are prestigious. Companies compete for apprentices, right? The CEO of UBS did an apprenticeship. This is not a consolation prize track. But, and this is a very significant but, if your child is heading toward a university-bound future and you do not pay attention and you want the door to remain open for them, fifth and sixth grade especially, performance matters. And if your child has spent their entire primary education in an international school being taught in English, possibly on a different curriculum, possibly in a way that hasn't specifically prepared them for Swiss academic expectations, grade 6 can be a super rude awakening. So it's really important to consider that when you make your decisions. In Switzerland specifically, as I want to just make one extra caveat, if you graduate from quote unquote high school or secondary education in Switzerland, you can go to Swiss university. If you graduate and get an IB, so an international baccalaureate degree in Switzerland, you are not going to go to Swiss university, more than likely. So it's just something to consider, right? That was a big consideration, which is why where we are right now, after she's had bilingual education in private school that we love from age 3 till grade 3. In grade 4, we've made the decision to move our daughter to the local Swiss school in our town before 6th grade because we want her to be fully in the Swiss system in German all day long with local kids, with local academic expectations before the year that matters. So she'll have grade in 4 and 5 to adjust. And then grade 6, she'll be ready to go as she gets into the final year before gymnasium. We want her to walk into 6th grade as a kid who has been in the system, not a kid who arrived to it from somewhere else. This for us is a deliberate decision we made with specific outcome in mind. It is not the cheapest option. It's not the easiest option, but it's the right option for what we want for her because when the tracking happens, we need her to be ready. For us, we paid for private education personally. No, it was not company subsidized for us. We paid for the private bilingual education from age 3 until age 8. So that's 5 years. She's going to make the switch from grade 4 to whenever. And that in and of itself is a change that will mean that we no longer have to pay for international education. So let's go into that. Let's talk about money for a minute, because I think people either don't talk about it at all or they talk about it in vague terms that doesn't actually help you plan. International schools, by and large, are expensive. In major cities like Geneva, Zurich, Singapore, Amsterdam, cities with large populations of foreigners, you can easily be looking at $20,000 to $40,000 per year per child. That's where that 20K number must have come from. But holy shit, that is per child. If you have 2 kids in the international school system in Geneva, you've just added a second mortgage to your life. Our private bilingual school in Switzerland is a little bit more affordable than that because we're not in Geneva, we're in Lucerne. And private schools here are not the same price as private schools in the most expensive cities in the world, but it is still not free and it is still a line item we plan for every year. It is a lot. And it's around, just for the school itself, it's around $15,000 a year. And then when we add after school programs and after school care, we're up in the neighborhood of around $20,000 a year, just as an aside. I'll be honest. Local schools in Switzerland and in most of European countries are free, genuinely free. Your taxes pay for it. Your kid walks in and your education is covered. That includes books, field trips, all that kind of stuff. What local school costs is time and support. Your kid is going to need language support, potentially from you, potentially from a tutor, definitely from their own resilience and adaptability. There may be a period, weeks or sometimes months, where school is hard and coming home is hard, and you're going to need more emotional support work than you expected. That's real and it deserves to be factored in as a cost, even though it doesn't show up on a bank statement. The trade-offs are also not just financial. It's about what you're optimizing for, what your kid can handle, what support systems you have around you, and how much time you have in the destination country before decisions like sixth grade checking start to matter. There is no universally right answer, but there are right answers for your family if you think through it honestly. You're probably like, cool, Mistel, that sounds great. What do I actually research? How do I do this for my own specific destination? So here's the practical piece. Every country's school system is different. The questions I want you to ask are the same, though, regardless of where you're going. Here are your questions. And there's a long list of them. Come back to this when you're ready to do it, or take a pause for a moment, grab a piece of paper and pencil. But these are important. What does local public school system look like for your child's age? And what are the enrollment requirements for foreign resident children? Some countries require enrollment within a specific number of days of establishing residency. Make sure you know this before you arrive. Are there tracking or sorting systems at any point in the school career that you need to plan for? Switzerland has grade 6. Germany has a similar system. France has its own version. So if you're moving somewhere with a tracking system and your child is approaching that age, understand before you get there, not after, because it makes a huge difference. Another big question that's really important is what language support exists for non-native speaking children entering the local system. Many countries have specific programs for this. The quality varies enormously, so ask the school directly. Don't just ask a blog. Once you know where you're going, have a direct conversation with the school. Most schools will have at least someone who speaks English who can support you through this. Another really important question is, what are the actual costs of international school in your specific city? Not a country average, the specific city you're thinking of moving to. City matters enormously. Geneva and a small town in the Swiss countryside are not the same number. Look at specific school websites and get actual tuition figures. And if your child has any specific special needs, learning differences, giftedness, food allergies, physical needs, anything that requires additional support or accommodation, research how the local system handles that specifically. Please don't assume. Ask, call the school, email the local education authority, get an actual answer before you arrive. This week, I want you to look up one thing about schools, just one. Find the school system overview for your target country, not a blog post, an actual government or educational authority of some kind, and read through enough of it that you understand whether there are any tracking or sorting moments in the years ahead for your kid's age. Note the age, the mechanism, and what that means for their future options. I think if you have time, go ahead and look up one international school in your target city and get the actual tuition rate that you know, so you have it you can write it down next to your monthly cost of living estimate, because that may be the deciding factor for you. Okay, that's it. I want you to look at one system overview and then ideally look at a tuition number so you have that for you and for yourself to start making these decisions. Because right now you probably have a vague sense that international school is expensive and local school is scary. And I want you to have actual numbers and actually understand what's going on around you, because actuals are always better than vague senses, always. So please do that. Okay, that's the schools episode for this week. If you're moving to Switzerland specifically and you want to understand the tracking system better, I'll link some resources in the show notes because it genuinely warrants more reading than I can give in one episode. For everyone else, the framework holds. Research the local systems before you default to international. Understand the tracking moments before they sneak up on you. Get actual tuition numbers, not approximate ones. And factor in not just the financial cost, but the real cost of whatever transition you're asking your kid to make. Your kid can handle more than you think, but you have to give them the information, the time, and the support to do it. That part is absolutely on you. Find me on Instagram. Tell me how old your kids are and where you're looking at making your move to. The school situation will vary so much by country and by age that I genuinely want to know your specific situation. All right, my friend, I will see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to A Broadly Speaking. If today's episode got you dreaming a little bigger or thinking a little braver, go ahead and hit subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who's ready for their own adventure. And hey, don't be a stranger. Come hang out with me over on Instagram at I am Mistel for the real, unfiltered life abroad. Keep that passport handy, and remember, life's too short to stay in one place.